you see AI changing this whole culture inside organizations, and what new responsibilities does it place on leaders when it comes to not only empowering people, but keeping them aligned?
I mean, AI is fascinating because AI is doing so much in such a great positive way that I think also sometimes people have their blinders on and they're so enthralled by AI, they're not realizing some of the risks with AI.
Welcome to What If with Leslie Grandy. Does everyone in your organization actually experience the culture in the same way? If you stopped people in the hallway or the boardroom, or you encountered your customers out in the wild and asked them what truly matters most to the company, would you hear a shared answer or a variety of interpretations? If the answers don't line up, the question isn't how do we communicate our culture better? It's why aren't we aligned in the first place? What are our actions, priorities, and everyday behaviors really teaching people about who gets to take risks, who has permission to think big, how failure is received, and how decisions actually get made? This is the tension that shows up as companies grow. What once lived as an unspoken understanding among a small, tight-knit team about autonomy, ownership, and moving fast starts to fracture as new leaders arrive with different mental models. Customer obsessed means one thing to one person and something else entirely to another. Microcultures form. The values on the lobby wall stay polished and inspiring, while the lived experience of the work becomes something else altogether. And then you layer in AI. Now culture isn't just being expressed through people, it's being stress tested in real time by technology that changes how work gets done, how decisions are made, and how customers experience your organization. AI doesn't just introduce new tools, it surfaces and amplifies whatever fractures already exist. If leadership says, we embrace innovation, but experimentation with AI is met with fear or control, employees will notice. If you say we value learning, but punish teams whose AI experiments don't immediately show ROI, the message is received clearly. In today's conversation, we explore what it really means to align belief, behavior, and leadership in moments of growth and disruption. My guest, Kelly Breslin Wright, has spent more than 3 decades building and advising companies at every stage, from scrappy early teams to global organizations. And throughout her career, she's been relentless about one idea: that culture isn't what you say, it's what people experience when they take a risk, think boldly, challenge an idea, or try something new. Together, we talk about how leaders can assess what their culture really is before trying to change it, how alignment at the top shapes everything, and why, in a world increasingly shaped by AI, the human in the loop may become the greatest competitive advantage of all. I hope you enjoy this episode. My guest today is Kelly Breslin Wright, a seasoned executive with more than 30 years' experience in leadership, sales, and strategy. She's held senior roles including president and COO at Gong and EVP of sales at Tableau, where she was the first salesperson for the company and helped grow revenue from $0 to $850 million, contributing to its rise as a multi-billion-dollar public company. Kelly is the founder and CEO of Culture Driven Sales and has served on the boards of public and private companies, including Fastly, Plum, Lucid, and Imperity. And she advises technology firms like Dropbox and Asana, and currently teaches as an adjunct professor at the University of Washington's Foster School of Business. Welcome, Kelly, to the podcast. I'm so delighted to be talking to you today.
Thank you, Leslie, for having me. And congratulations to you on Creative Velocity. I'm so excited for you that the book is out and that you get to talk to people about being creative.
Yeah, it's a wonderful chapter in my life to be able to focus on something that's my passion, and I'm sure you're in the same place as well. One of the things I want to start off with is one of my favorite stories that I remember I heard you tell when we met a few years back was that you sold educational books door to door for 4 summers in college. And you've said that selling books introduced you to guiding principles like hard work, passion, risk taking, thinking big, among other things. So talk about why you chose spending your college summers doing this in the first place, and what kept drawing you back, and why was it so formative? It's a fascinating job for someone in college, so I'm just interested to get more context for it.
Yeah, let's see. It's so funny because it was so long ago when I was, 18 to 21. And people always want to talk about this of like what got you into sales in the first place, way, way, way back then. So it was this crazy job. So I went to Stanford. Most people in the summer were interning at banks and consulting. They were doing internships or going back home and lifeguarding, whatever they were. And I decided I wanted to do something that was very different. I wanted to take a risk. I wanted to do something that was outside my comfort zone. So I decided to work with this company that employed just college students, thousands of college students every summer, to run their own business selling educational books door to door. And part of the reason I did it, well, my cousin had done it. So I had known someone had been successful, but I thought, hey, this is a great way that I could early on in my career, before I even graduate, do something that's entrepreneurial, run my own business, and like go to a different part of the country and do it. So I lived in the Bay Area in California. I ended up selling books for 4 summers in very affluent suburbs of New York and New Jersey. And basically ran my own business. But the thing that was so fascinating about this is over the course of those 4 summers, I ended up speaking to over 12,000 families in their homes. And I saw everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything you can imagine that would go on in a home. But the thing that was so interesting about it is every family was different. And I just found it fascinating to be able to go in, be able to ask the right questions to understand what is their situation, and then to be able to help them on in an area where I was very passionate about it, of education, helping kids in school. But I think the other thing was it, as you kind of are talking about risks and going out, testing your boundaries and being creative. When you go knock on doors, you're not the most welcome person that people want to see. Like, they don't want to see you. And so you have to figure out a whole bunch of things. One, how can you emotionally connect literally in less than 20 or 30 seconds before they decide that they're going to slam the door? But then also, regardless of what happens, how can you leave what happened at that one house and go next door and show up as your best self? Because if you're taking all that baggage with you, you're not gonna show up as your best self, and you're not gonna have a chance of being able to make a sale at the next door. And so learning how to control what you can control, not worry about the rest, learning how to be resilient, deal with failure, and to be taking risks are all things that I learned at a very young age.
I really love those skills because those life skills aren't really taught in the classroom. They're the way that you learned them really, came with some bruises probably, but also had a lasting impact. Did you realize when you were 18, 19, 20 that this is what you were getting out of it? Or did it take years and looking back on it for you to really reflect on what strengths you derived from that experience?
Yeah, well, I think at that experience, they talk a lot about how doing this job was going to teach you sustainable foundational life skills and character building skills. But it's one thing to be saying that when you're a late teenager or early in your 20s and so early in your career. I think now, just the fact that when I do speaking things or podcasts or whatever, people want to hear about it. It becomes more and more resonant that, hey, these skills are going to be super, super important. And I think what happens is when, especially now, with everyone always trying to have good grades and good performance reviews, there's often like people are trying to adjust to exactly what the rubric is saying or exactly the expectations for someone that's already been there, done that before. And it ends up kind of putting such firm guardrails that it's a little bit harder to do things where one, we talk about like, how are we going to build the muscle for resiliency, adaptability, being able to know how to deal with failure, where there is relatively low tolerance for failure in school or in the workplace, because people want you to be successful. They think like all that is wasted time. I mean, this is a lot of what you talk about in your thought leadership, but of course, everyone want to have great results, But if you're always making small incremental changes, you're never going to be able to do big, bold, transformational moves because people have to be willing to take risks to do that. So I think that's the first. I think, secondly, it's not only the muscle of adaptability and risk taking, it's also when something comes up and it's unexpected, like what you actually even do. So, like, there's a whole how do people actually just handle dealing with uncertainty or change or unexpected events? I mean, we saw that all during COVID. Like, the world was just turned upside down. And if there's people that they're just accustomed to, okay, you need to take what's coming in. It might not be what's expected, but how are we going to adapt, be able to adjust, and be able to continue to press forward without being like so turned upside down? It comes back again to that muscle of dealing with change, flexibility, adaptability, risk taking, and being able to deal with failure. Because I mean, when I was selling books door to door, I mean, you're knocking on 30 doors a day, but the high majority of those are no's. And so you're getting very, very few yeses and a lot of no's, just like in sales. So sales is one of those where you do learn that muscle in the day to day job.
So, looking back at your career, starting at this moment that we're talking about and going all the way through the growth that you had into leadership roles and the impact that you had and the impact radius that you were able to grow over time, what would you say is the through line in your career as a leader? How do you feel in each of these experiences, whether they were startups or large companies that you were consulting with or board roles that you've had? When you look back at that journey, how do I pull a thread through it all? What would you have me take from that as your through line?
Well, I think for anyone that is listening to this podcast that has heard me before and knows me will just think like I sound like a broken record because I'm always talking about the same thing all the time. And look, I have my own business called Culture Driven Sales, and I teach that course. It really does come back to culture and people because I think what happens is I've worked at companies of multiple different sizes at very different stages, sometimes been an operator, sometimes been an advisor, sometimes been a board director, sometimes been a teacher. So different companies, different stages, different roles. But I think my own personal philosophy is always the same. And the way I think about it is it's people who start companies. It's people who build companies. It's people that hire other people. It's people who manage those people. Most of the time, unless you're having AI do it now. There's people who are engaging with your customers. There's people who are providing your customer service. It's people who are making decisions. I mean, even when you're in this world now where you're having AI, there's still people involved in making decisions about where you're going to go, what the company's going to do, what product you're going to buy. And so I think what ends up happening is oftentimes people are thinking about leadership of how do you get operational efficiency? How do you do operational effectiveness? How are you launching all these different processes? How are you getting speed, productivity? All of that is clearly essential. But for me, it's really of if you get the people right, you're going to have a leg up on everything else. And so for me, it's all about the people always. And that brings back to a lot of what we can talk about culture with mission, vision, values, or how you build high performance teams. All of that because you want people to be connected to the mission and purpose of the company. You want people to feel like they can have a positive impact. You want people to feel inspired and motivated to be their best self, do their best work, and bring their authentic self to work. And all of that is really where I've put my highest priorities through all of my roles and really focused on that for the people that have been on my teams, whether in management or individual contributor roles, because you get the people side right, a lot else will follow. You can have the best company with the right time and the right place, and you get the people wrong, it's not going to go well. But you get the people right, you can adapt a lot of other things.
So that really brings me to a question I'm wondering. When you are either an advisor in a company, a board member, or actually an executive, when a company starts growing fast, what's the first thing you notice change in how people start taking risks or making decisions or handling ambiguity or adapting to change? And how does the rate of growth either spawn fear or empowerment? What is the opportunity in hypergrowth for people to evolve culture or to actually be hindered by the culture that got them to that point?
Yeah. Leslie, I think there are a lot of questions layered in that statement. So
Yeah, so go
it's
whatever direction you want to go
yeah,
because
so I think there's a lot of different ways that you can take that. Let's just say here are a few common mistakes that I see companies make as they're growing and scaling. And if they're already a large company, it might be when they're taking a pivot or change. It's very consistent kinds of challenges, regardless of how big the company is. So the first is oftentimes when companies are very small, they're super thoughtful and intentional about what's their mission, what's their why, because they have to communicate that because they don't already have all the referenceable customers. They don't have the brand awareness, all that. As companies get bigger, they often tend to focus so much more on the operational guts. They focus so much on the what and the how that they stop remembering how important the why is. And this ends up impacting a few things. One, it means that your customers don't quite understand, like, why do you exist in the first place? Which then becomes a feature, function, price type of decision instead of actually believing what you believe and wanting to go on that journey with you. Because if you think about thought leadership or why brands have customer loyalty, a lot of that all comes back to the customers believing what you believe. This is true, though, not only for customers, prospects, partners, but it's also really true for employees too. Because early days, employees feel very connected to the purpose of the company and the mission of what they're doing and know that they can have a, an impact and make a difference and a dent in driving that purpose forward. And this is true for large companies that have great employee retention and win as best places to work. But oftentimes, people or companies start thinking about that, each person has their specific role of a very tactical type of role where they get disconnected from the human connection and start treating employees like they're just cogs in the wheel. And, people will go places to learn and to make money. But the reason that people stay in a job is because they want to learn, they want to grow, they want to develop. And most importantly, they feel like they can make an impact on what the purpose of the company is. And I think as companies grow and change so quickly, they lose sight, which brings me back to the same thing of like, this is my leadership principle. It all comes back to people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what if you were brought in to advise a CEO on how to supercharge the culture of innovation and growth? What's the first thing you look at to establish kind of a baseline to really understand the as is state and before you could make recommendations about what to change? Where would you start?
Yeah, well, I think that let's separate those into two things. Because one, when you talk about the culture, and then secondly, you talk about change and innovation and transformation. So I want to take they're related, but let's take them separately. First, with the culture, oftentimes when I go into a company, I'll have the founder, CEO, executive that I'm speaking to ask that person, what is the mission and purpose of the company? How do you tell the company story and like what is the company why? Tell me why that matters and what you're doing. And then I will go into kind of talk about like, what are the top focus areas of what you're trying to do to drive that forward? They'll give me their answer and then I'll talk to other executives on the team and I'll ask them the same question. And Leslie, like literally I've done this well over 100 times, probably over 200 times at companies. And the significant, sizable majority of the time, different executives have they think that they're aligned, but they have very different ways of explaining and describing what their why and what their purpose is. And it's very difficult as you go to the next part of how are you going to drive transformation and change when you have different executives that believe that they are there as a company to do different things. So it might be like in the same vicinity, it might be in the same category or concept, but you have to be crazy aligned at the top in terms of what is your mission, your vision, what's the why of your company, because that is going to drive what your corporate strategy is. And that corporate strategy then goes down through your product strategy and your go to market strategy, the way you engage and hire and nurture and manage your employees, but also how you're communicating who you are and what you do to all of your prospects. So I think that's on the culture side. Let's just see if there's any questions about that, then we can go to the change and
No,
transformation.
I think that's exactly what I was going for, which is a baseline assessment of does everyone see the culture the same way? Because you can't change if the baseline is not set, right? First, it seems like that's the clear answer to the question is the first thing you do is check what everyone thinks the culture is, and then from that determine if there is a baseline or not to work from. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Right. And so then as you think about moving them forward into a transformational time, how do you get that alignment? What do you do? What is necessary in order for you to make that turn happen successfully if what you say is that you often find people's interpretation of the existing culture to be different?
Yeah, well, you need to get the team aligned about what they're trying to do and what's most important. And so, there's things that you can do of certain, like a lot of times people say, that's all that touchy feely stuff. We don't really care about the mission and vision and values. And we don't like, I've had CEOs say to me, hey, Kelly, I literally can't spend time on that touchy feely stuff. Like, I need you to come in and help with the operational guts. Like, we have to go drive more revenue. We have to go drive more efficiency. We have to increase our speed and productivity. And like, I need you to get teams productive. I can't focus on that. And then my challenge back is, yeah, but your team isn't aligned. Like, you're not going to go faster. I know you don't think this is important, but if your team is all like, I like to explain it. One example I've used is, let's say you have a roadmap and we're all going to like New York City, and you have your whole team and you show up in New York City and you start at one spot. Let's say you start in front of New York Stock Exchange at Wall Street and you say, "Okay, we're all spending the day in New York. So go." Okay, New York's a big place. Like, you're still in New York City, but people might all end up in different places and go on very different paths of where they're going. And then everyone's going to end up being kind of close, but in a different area. Otherwise, you might say, okay, well, we are starting here, but we need everyone to end up at the zoo at Central Park. And people might have different ways that they want to get there, or they might want to see different things and or take different pit stops on the way. But you know that everyone is on this roadmap where they're headed to the same place. And it's like you have to have everyone be aligned on what the North Star is. And they might promote different ways to take the path, but you need to make sure that everyone is heading in the same direction to go to the same ultimate goal.
You're listening to What If with Leslie Grandy. If you want to activate your imagination and build your creative muscles, I've put together some free resources, including webinars, downloadable content, bonus book content, and even a GPT to help you achieve your goals. Access these free tools to start asking what if today at lesliegrandy.com/resources. How do you see AI changing this whole culture inside organizations, and what new responsibilities does it place on leaders when it comes to not only empowering people, but keeping them aligned?
I mean, AI is fascinating because AI is doing so much in such a great positive way that I think also sometimes people have their blinders on and they're so enthralled by AI, they're not realizing some of the risks with AI. So let's talk about what are the good, powerful things and then where some of the watch outs are. I think on the positive things is everyone knows AI is making people and companies way more productive, way more efficient, way more speed. I mean, for me, I live in go to market. And so on the go to market side, there used to be SDRs, sales development reps, or CSMs, customer success managers, sales reps. People were spending ridiculous amount of time on research. So before they were calling on prospects, they were researching the company, researching the person individually, and doing tons and tons of research. And then data isn't ever clean, so then spending a whole bunch of time to figure out if they have the right level of data, synthesizing that data, and that in its own, people were spending sometimes over 50% of their time on just that. So they're way more productive. But now AI is helping them of like, what does the sentiment of the customer say? Bringing all that together. We can replicate this for all the different functions, helping you with what the next steps are. What should your priorities be? What is competitive benchmarking? All of this. So it's helping people to be way more effective, save tons of time, be able to get through all the mundane tasks. I mean, this was really what Gong was about on the go to market side. So it was just making people so much more effective. So that's the positive. On the flip side, though, you have to say, okay, just like, AI is the next generation of data. It's just like what we said at Tableau. Like Tableau could help people with slicing and dicing and doing a whole bunch of data analysis, but it's only as good as the data. So if the data is wrong, the insights coming out of it are going to be wrong. And I think sometimes people are forgetting that AI is actually the next generation of data and it's only as good as the underlying data. And because I think some of the AI agents are so smart and they come out sounding so eloquent, oftentimes people are taking all of that as fact. And people need to even be much more thoughtful about before making recommendations or making decisions that you're validating that the data that you're relying on is actually correct. Otherwise, you're going to start losing trust and confidence and credibility with customers and employees alike if you don't do that. So that's one challenge. We have to be very careful of the accuracy and the factual nature of the AI. The second is AI is massively leveling the playing field. And so if you think, hey, my company, we had so many great researchers, we were way up ahead because we had way more information. Well, now everyone has those efficiencies and processes and speed, and it's lowering and leveling the playing field that this baseline of knowledge, expertise, process effectiveness, streamlining operational flows, all of that is going to be streamlined. And so then what is your difference? Of course, your product is different, but then it becomes people are even more important because your employees are going to be expecting better management, better coaching, more insightful one-on-ones. Otherwise, if they're not getting anything for the manager, then they can go take that job and go do their quality of work or their body of work somewhere else. So I think AI is very much leveling the playing field, and people aren't yet realizing that AI is going to put the burden on your people and leadership and what I call the human in the loop side. It's going to kind of volley back. It's going to ricochet back. And people are not thinking about that enough yet. That people are going to be really, really, really important. And it'll be part of each company's competitive differentiator and moat now.
From a cultural standpoint, what does that tell people what to do that they may not have had to do prior? What kind of cultural values do they need to sort of lean into, or what are the beliefs that they have to communicate to the employees to remove anxiety and fear and replace it with empowerment?
Yeah. Well, I think, there is a lot of fear right now. Many people are not very satisfied or happy or, feeling much psychological safety in their jobs because they're like, oh, AI, especially for those of us in tech, AI might come and take my job away. What am I going to do? And so I think this is when the whole cycle back on culture becomes really important is oftentimes managers, they they are managing to like the output of what people are doing, not really thinking about what one-on-ones are really about. Like how how do you actually drive motivation, inspiration, and actually have crucial conversation? Because there are going to be plenty of jobs that they're going to go away. And people want and value trust, honesty, candid conversations. So I think managers are going to have to become much better at handling the crucial conversations and being able to have direct, honest communication. I think that's one. I think secondly, no, I've talked about this often and I've written articles about this in the past, but I talk about like the importance of this new role. Well, it's not a new role because it's been there forever, called the CBO. People go, Kelly, what's the CBO? And it's the chief belief officer. And I've always seen that my role, whether I was CRO, head of sales, president, chief operating officer, whatever it is, my role a lot is being a chief belief officer because you need to help your employees and your customers to believe in what you believe. They need to, like, employees need to believe that they can be successful. They need to believe in the company. You need your customers to believe that you're going to actually deliver something of value for them. And so that becomes a lot more of how do you inspire and how do you motivate? Because if you have inspired and motivated, let's talk about this for employees, they're going to be their best selves. And then coming back, Leslie, to what you're talking about, when people are their best self and they're inspired and motivated, they're not only going to work harder, but they're going to push the limit a bit more because they feel so passionate about what they're doing. They're going to feel not only enabled to take bigger risks, but willing to take bigger risks because they are so committed to moving the company forward that they're going to want to be more bold and transformational in their actions than just playing it safe. Because people are gonna play it safe if they're scared that they're gonna, AI is gonna come take them out.
Well, there's like three things I wanted to peel apart in there. So, one thing I want to talk about is what separates a culture where people feel safe from to challenge ideas, to try and fail, to take risks, from the ones where everyone sort of plays it safe, like you said. And the thought I had from what you were saying, because that question of playing it safe, I think, is a cultural one, right? That's a cultural question. But I also think there's this emerging technology that people aren't sure what to do with yet. And so that makes it difficult for people to suggest big ideas or challenging ideas if the leaders haven't decided what they want to do with AI or what their AI strategy is, or what they believe AI will contribute to their overall mission and purpose. And so when the leaders aren't able to communicate that, does that cause employees to play it safer?
Well, I think those are 2 different things again, that you have AI where some companies are using AI quite a bit and other companies are not. And I think that's just like when you're building up a muscle of change and transformation, like I know companies that are doing this well, they really are having an expectation that every person in every role needs to be using AI in one way or another. So maybe it is helping them to brainstorm or helping them to do competitive research or helping them to think about what are some of the new trends or recommend some policies. How do you synthesize this? How can you take this long report and make it shorter? I mean, there's zillions and zillions, that unlimited number of ways that you can. But if you're thinking about leveraging and tapping into AI, then you need to figure out not only how you're just going to do it in your products, your customers, but you create an environment where you're asking and demanding for everyone to start thinking about AI and using and leveraging AI to get better. And then you're managing that. So I think that's one way for AI. We can go more deep into that. I think on the other piece of like being able to have a culture where people are taking risks, each of the listeners out there, you should just ask yourself, like, are people on your team, would they feel safe taking a risk? And have you set up environments and protocols in your company that not only encourage and invite it, but it actually like rewards taking risks? So here are some things that I've seen other companies do that we've done. Like, so um, both at Tableau and Gong, we had different versions of hackathons. So at Tableau, there was a hackathon where every year the developers had some time to just go play on their own, like figure out what if they were going to go build a feature, what they would do. And then we had the hackathon day and all the company came together and we kind of voted on it. At Gong, we had something very similar where all of the developers went and spent some time creating little mock-ups, and then they actually presented those to the whole company. The company voted, and then there were winners. And oftentimes, like the winners were something that were implemented into the product. So you have to give your team time to think and to develop and to be creative. That needs to be like built into the muscle of the company. Some other companies have done, one day a week or one day a month or a few hours one day a week, that it's really just meant for people to go and think and try to come up with these bold ideas. So those are ways that you can do it. I think also you need to say, well, if you're encouraging people to take risks and go out and try things, like they're not all going to work. And so what are the ramifications when something doesn't work? Now, is it someone tries something and then they go there and now they got a bad performance review or they get fired because they did something? Then no one's going to want to take any risks. So, of course, you need to be able to say, okay, there need to be safe way where people can go test and try things before you're spending too much time and money and reallocating resources. So you as a company need to figure out, well, how can we have a culture that allows people to think outside the box, to challenge the status quo, to take risks, and then to not be penalized if something doesn't go extremely well that way?
All that makes sense. And I think what I was trying to sort of intersect is the idea that an AI strategy could develop with bold thinking employees who felt empowered to suggest those ideas. But the culture would have to exist that would allow them to say, while we're formulating our AI strategy, we're going to also take input and insight from people who actually are working on those models and actually understand what those models can do. And then we can formulate an AI strategy, because it doesn't matter where the idea came from. It just matters that people feel like they can contribute to our thinking strategically.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're basically saying the same thing I am, but with a much more narrow confine of how it works within the realm of AI. So I think that is true pretty much in any realm, and then you can apply that same logic to the AI.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that I know individually are taking chances with AI personally and trying vibe coding and doing different things, but their organizations haven't opened up that culture of exploration. And so they do it on their own time and they don't feel invited to bring that into their job because it's not expected that they would contribute from that way. And so I think that's a challenge from a cultural perspective if somebody feels the way they have to do that exploration is on their own time, and that they can't really have a voice in the direction the business goes because of all that experience they know that they got outside of the organization. And so I think that's another kind of question: is the organization open to hearing those ideas from anyone?
That would be disappointing if that is the case. And obviously, like my world, I'm only talking to a finite number of companies, but I'm finding, but I also live predominantly in tech, that companies are more and more and more embracing. They know AI is here to stay. And I think companies are being much more inviting and open to AI. I think in some ways they're because they don't fully understand how AI is going to drive change and transformation. They before were kind of hesitant. Now they're like, oh, I know we have to do it. I know it is here to stay. And my whole feedback is just remember everything that comes out of AI is not perfect. You have to still have the human in the loop. You still need to validate. Otherwise, what's going to happen is then you can lose all credibility. And this is a very similar thing when we talk about how AI is the next generation of data. We saw this with Tableau too. Is everyone was saying, "Hey, we know we want to democratize data. We want know that everyone should be able to answer their own questions faster, more efficiently. the old school way of doing things are so hard. But there was this whole hesitancy of like, ooh, we kind of locked down our data. We don't want to go give everyone our data. What if someone does something wrong with the data? Or what if some data gets out and we have some kind of a data leak? Which were all legitimate thoughts, but they were kind of getting in their own way of their own progress, even though they were all saying, we know this is the way of the future, but we're not ready yet. Well, then you're just, as a company, setting yourself up to be last mover. You don't ever want to be in the place where you're just way at the end. And the same thing's happening now with AI. Everyone knows AI is here to stay. Everyone knows AI is going to change and transform things. So instead of like waiting until everyone has figured it out, which is then going to put you in the penalty box way, way at the back of the line, you need to be able to say, okay, there are some inherent risks of AI. So how do we go in with eyes wide open, embrace it, help us to be able to be more effective, move faster, be able to embrace these transformations in a way that we couldn't before, while still being cognizant of what the challenges and the risks are and keeping those in mind. I think it's just like with any kind of transformation, it's a balance. But saying, oh, I don't want to work on the balance, so I'm just not going to do the transformation isn't going to serve anyone good.
Absolutely. One of the things that we started with that job that you had is the 30 doors that you knocked on a day, and how many of those didn't result in anything. And so obviously you've learned to accept failure on the path to success. As you're teaching students in culture driven sales classes, how do you get them to accept failure as as a positive and as a motivator? What is the way you teach the acceptance of failure in a culture driven sales class to people who were as young as you were when you started experiencing failure when the door shut in your face? So I really am fascinated now that you're bringing it full circle and you're teaching people that age. What's the lesson there? How do you get them to understand that lesson?
Well, I think that failure is uncomfortable, right? That's why people get so nervous about it. They don't like taking risks because it's uncomfortable. They don't like doing something different. They don't like doing something that's just stepping outside of the box or their comfort zone. And so I think there's a few things. I think it is pretty well known that as like the oftentimes biggest learnings come from your biggest mistakes or your biggest failures. People intellectually know that doesn't mean that they want to go through the failures. But if you're trying to become like a more well-rounded executive or leader or business person, or even in your job, and you're only going to have successes, then you're not going to actually get all of that learning. And so I think people intuitively understand that. So we talk about that. I think the other thing, and this is part of the reason that I just love sales. And sales, you get something different with each person that you talk to and each different opportunity. But it's really a large part of it does come down to how many doors you're knocking on. Like how many calls are you making? How many attempts that you're going to have? Because everything is not going to be successful. I mean, even if you look at professional athletes or Olympians, they talk about how many times did they go compete where they didn't win before they got their medal. Or I remember like at Tableau, when Tableau went public, we had been at that building the company for years and years and years. And people would say, oh, Tableau was an overnight success, just popped up. And it was like, well, no, just because you never heard of it didn't mean that we weren't like doing things with many fits and starts for a very long time. So I think, one of the ways that I use for people early in their career is they're all trying to get jobs. And it's very interesting because I'll say, how many of you are in sales? And oftentimes, like nobody will raise their hand. A couple of people raise their hand. And I'll ask the question again, are you sure you're not in sales? How many of you have ever been in sales? And they don't. And then I could just use like a couple examples of uh, you're trying to how many of you are interviewing to get jobs? Everyone's hand goes up. Well, what do you think you're doing every time you're in an interview? I mean, that's a sales role, right? And you have to typically have quite a few interviews, especially in this kind of job climate, before you can win. And so I think being able to show and highlight tangible examples of where they're living and breathing that every day, and then also examples of people or companies that are very successful that have had a lot of fits and starts and misses help to illustrate and solidify and reinforce those points.
Yeah, it's funny you say that last one. Everybody thinks of Apple as being a hit machine, but when I was there, Steve invented this speaker for an iPod that looked like a cooler. It was just big and no, and it sold nothing. People don't remember that. People don't remember the misses because the successes are so eclipse the misses that they forgive them right there. That's okay. You can, everything out of the cannon doesn't have to land. And so it's so fascinating that people don't remember that Steve Jobs made those kinds of mistakes, right? That those were product failures. And I think every company, even that looks like it's super successful, rocket ship to an IPO and a successful start as a public company, maybe didn't have one start. Maybe it took 3 or 4 times before they found the lane, right? And that, I think that's something people forget. And as a human lesson, I think it's important in the way you're teaching it for people to appreciate the learning that comes from the failure, right? The learning that comes from why that maybe didn't work out as opposed to perceiving it as failure. And I know you read the book, but there's someone in the book, my favorite quote was, we need to rebrand failure because people think of it so negatively. And I think it's to your point, it's an asset, right? In some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think one contrarian way of thinking about it is if you had a company that are filled with people that have been successful 100% of the time, and none of them have the muscle or experience to work through failure or change. Well, let's separate those through failure, or they don't have the resiliency to be able to navigate when times go tough. Like, most people aren't gonna want those to lead the company because any company is going to run into fits and starts. You're gonna have challenges. I mean, there's no one that's built a company without lots of roller coaster ups and downs. And you need to have people that know how to handle and navigate through those hard times. That you need to have people who are willing and able to take risks because that's how you're going to have disruptive transformational change. And you also need to have people who can manage other people in a way where when when the going gets tough or when people have a challenge or people, fall down, to get people back up, because it's just not realistic that everything's going to go right all of the time. But sometimes the way our performance management cycles and the way our reward systems and even the way we give feedback is so much focused on, we want everything to go perfectly within these very linear guardrails. And then you get yourself completely into the innovator's dilemma of, no one's going to challenge, no one's going to change things, no one's going to actually innovate to push forward because it's too hard and they're scared of the ramifications. So everyone should just ask themselves, of course, we want people to have high success and to be successful on the initiatives that we have at hand. But if we're going to be the big, bold, transformational company, then what are we doing very purposefully and intentionally to build that muscle of transformation and risk taking inside our companies?
I love that. That's such a great, simple yet impactful approach to thinking about not only risk and reward, but also navigating ambiguity and change. So I really appreciate that. My last question for you: you're so passionate about what you do, and you've been doing it bigger and deeper and more of a radius of people who can see what you can bring to the table. What if you couldn't do this? What if you had to do something different? What if this was off limits for whatever reason, and you no longer were able to sort of champion the culture of change and the culture of sales and the workplace environment? What would you do?
What would I do? Well, there's a bunch of things that I'm passionate about. Obviously, I'm passionate about this. One of the things that I would do if I wasn't doing culture-driven sales specifically, although it's related, is super passionate about just helping people on their careers. So in coaching and nurturing the next generation of leaders. And so I do this with my teaching, I do this with mentoring, I do this with speaking, all of that. And I also do that in continuing to find ways that I can help foster more education in areas where education is not as readily available, especially for girls, like in third world countries where um, it's just harder to access education. And I think that ties into my whole desire to give back to the next generation and help to nurture the next group of leaders and workers and just human beings. So that's what I would do. And I am doing that already.
Where can people find out more about you and the culture-driven sales approach that you really champion? What's the best way for people to learn more?
Oh, thanks, Leslie. People can definitely just connect with me on LinkedIn. Just you can find me, Kelly Breslin Wright. And also you can find me on my website at culturedrivensales.com, exactly as it sounds, culturedrivensales.com. And there are ways that you can notify me on the website as well. So thank you for hosting me. This was a fun conversation.
No, I always learn something from you, and I really appreciate you making the time to share those learnings. Even with a 30-year career myself, there's something that you say that I always got when I meet with you or talk with you that I go, yeah, I should keep that in mind. That so it's
Oh, what
always
was it today? What was it today? I'm
well,
just curious.
for me, what I really appreciate is how you assess a culture and how you think about a culture before you move to change it or to grow it. And I love that idea that the very first thing that you do is really have people reflect back what they think the culture is. Because to me, I think so many places I've worked for, if people had done that, they would have seen some of the potholes they were going to run into ahead of time. And I think that's such a valuable exercise for a company to look at itself in that way and address them proactively, right? Those different points of view. I think that's really so simple, yet so powerful, and so few companies do it.
Well, Leslie, I always learn from you as well. And thank you for pushing the world to be more creative and helping to empower people of how to take on more big, bold risks because we need more of that, especially as we're driving all this transformational change. So thank you for
Thank
all you
you.
do.
Thanks for joining my podcast today. Really encourage all of you to look at Kelly's website. You'll learn a lot. Even if you Google her, you might see some great posts that she's written on other websites. I love the one that you did for Thrive Global on this story about the School of Hard Knocks. So I think there's a lot of really great information to gain by doing some research on Kelly and the work that she does.
Thank
Thanks for
you,
joining
Leslie.
me today.
You've been listening to What If with Leslie Grandy. If you want to learn more about creative leadership in the age of generative AI, subscribe to my Substack at lesliegrandy.substack.com.